else use other?
Logic.
Yep.
Logic.
I use Ableton.
Ableton.
Logic and Ableton.
Yeah. What kind of music do you do with Logic and Ableton?
It's typically like indie pop music, or just like rock music.
Mm-hmm.
I have a really small space up at my house in Michigan, and like traditionally like more of an artist, but just sort of now coming into tracking everything myself. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Logic and Ableton more for live stuff.
Yeah.
It's the interface brings so many like MIDI controls to the front for you to own everything in real time live. So
yeah.
I use that. The Logic for MIDI stuff and tracking is a lot easier. So
right. Yeah.
I hate Pro Tools. Not because it's bad. I just like I came up on Logic.
Yeah.
Pro Tools just looks like Chinese to me.
Huh.
And like I believe in it. Like I track with him all the time at his space, and he's a Pro Tools like guru. So I'm
Pro
like
Tooler.
Pro Tooler. I believe it. It's great.
Hashtag
I just like working in Logic.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, there's the everybody has preferences and likes one, doesn't like another, but I think the best. We're literally just talking about recording music, and Pro Tools is mostly geared towards just that.
Mm-hmm.
So not like how to record music and operate a ton of instruments live and in real time and all that stuff. So it's a little bit when we're coming at it from, a recording like this, like the instruments were all out there and we were just recording them from in here. So that that's why we end up using Pro Tools. All right, so is that back up and running?
Back up.
So the basic gist here is that if looking from left to right, can you scroll over to all the way to the left? Looking from left to right, all the blue tracks are audio tracks. All the green tracks are aux tracks, right? So generally, a kick in and a kick out, they get blended together in that green aux track right next to it, right? And then snare top and snare bottom, they get blended together in that green aux snare track, right? Matt smartly color codes a couple of tracks in a session red, the bass and the vocal, and that's mostly just for a quick, easy visual of where the hell am I, right? What we do is we generally go drums, so it goes left to right, it goes drums, and then bass, and then guitars, and then the lead vocal, and then backup vocals, and then the next thing over in the system here are these red tracks, like the darker red tracks, right? And those are what we call group master outputs. And what they're doing is everything in this recording session is being sent to one of those group master tracks. And those group master tracks are going to correspond with tracks on the console, right? So everything in Pro Tools gets funneled through those. Those come up as tracks here on the Mackie. And then, in theory, the output of the Mackie goes out. We don't have a stereo compressor, do we?
No.
No. So, in theory, what happens is the output of the Mackie then comes back in as two new tracks in Pro Tools. So, in other words, we're recording it out through the summing components of the console back into two new tracks, right? Okay. And that's the basic routing.
For what purpose?
For what purpose?
The last step.
Of coming back in?
Yeah.
Because the end goal is a stereo audio track, right? So it's in order for it to go out through the console and then come back in, it's got to be recorded back in as a stereo audio track. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
worth pointing out. Yeah. Well, in the older days or the way we work at our studio, a lot of times the end stage is a reel-to-reel machine, a 2-track reel-to-reel tape machine. And so what we'll do with theirs, record to that tape machine,
right.
And in real time, it then the output of the tape machine comes back into Pro Tools. So the question is how do you take a final mix to tape and then go get it mastered? And, you know, you could take that reel-to-reel to a mastering house, and then they put it up on a machine, and then they do what they do, and then they bring it back into digital. But we just bring it back into the digital realm ourselves, kind of all in one swoop. So in order to work through the console, what we need to do is we need to make sure that these faders are at a calibrated, reproducible level. So what we have is we have a tone, a sine wave in Pro Tools that is sending out to the console. And that's going to literally just have it so that we know how high this up or down this should be, right? Looking here, we could try to pick a consistent point. We could set the little faders so that they come to exactly like what's written as unity gain on the console, but that's never accurate. It varies from channel to channel. So the best way to know that it's accurate is to send a tone to it and then push it up until the meter is consistently where we want it to be.
Yeah. Is there a channel that I should route it to?
Any channel's probably fine.
Was that the talkback?
Yeah.
So they can hear you in the
Yeah.
headphones out there.
Can you guys hear us? No. Check, check, check.
Check, check,
You can hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so give a tone, and we're gonna maybe pull all those faders down, and we'll just do each one by one. How many of them are there, Matt? How many? We have from 15 to 24.
Yeah. Yeah. There's
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Oh,
So
8.
yeah, 8. So we don't go all the way, but
So that should be 17 to 24.
no, we don't go up to 24. We start at 15.
Oh, I
We go
gotcha.
up to 22.
Okay. So what we're going to do is the groups in Pro Tools are going to be what? They're going to be a stereo drum bus, right? They're going to be either stereo groups or mono groups. And the only mono groups are what? Bass and vocal.
Mm-hmm.
So basically those red tracks correspond with mono tracks.
Maybe I should just use the VU.
Yeah,
Just
maybe
go to
use the
0
V.
on the VU.
Yeah.
So generally, you would keep a vocal in mono, like a bass.
Yeah.
and
A
would you do
lead. So
a lead vocal.
yeah. So it's a weird cornerstone of our organizational thinking is that tracks are either managed as what we call center elements of a mix or the side elements of a mix, right? And the only two center elements that we're really focused on are the bass and the vocal.
Right.
Everything else is a side element.
Even
like
the
snare
kick drum?
or a kick drum, yeah.
Oh, well, so the kick and the snare, the way Matt has sort of started doing it, the kick and the snare are embedded in the stereo. They're panned up the center, but part of a stereo drum bus.
Okay. Gotcha.
Usually for the way that I'm accustomed to doing it, it'd be like the kick, the snare, the bass, and the vocal are the center elements.
Right.
And then everything else are side elements.
'Cause you want
But he's just sort of embedded together all the drums. And it's because he likes to put when we're working, where we're working at the studio, he likes to put a single analog compressor and, chain on all of the drums
Gotcha.
together.
Okay.
So that's how that kind of has migrated back towards being like a stereo bus, but with center elements embedded within it. So
Okay.
it's a little bit complicated.
Gotcha.
It's less complicated,
simpler.
but it's a little
Yeah.
complicated when we're talking about our organizational structure.
Sure. Cool.
The weird thing is that it skips 2. Somehow. It skips 19 and 20, but I don't think we need to worry about that.
Nah.
So all I'm doing is I'm going through all of these and I'm just lining them up with 0 on this VU.
What is VU?
It's a voltage unit. It's like a averaging meter. So these meters right here are likely peak meters, which means they're super quick to respond.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you had a snare drum or something that's very quick transient, you would see exactly how loud it gets,
Mm-hmm.
and then it would refresh very quickly. A VU is more like your ear. It's like averaged. So if you hit a snare that might actually be at +1, it might only show up as -5.
Interesting.
Because by the time the transient goes and the meter like catches up, it doesn't get that high because the snare's already gone.
Gotcha.
So a VU meter is actually a really healthy way to look at things.
Okay.
What it does is it lets peaks be peaks. It kind of ignores them philosophically, and it's more focused on the average of things.
Gotcha.
So I even in my sort of laptop setup, I have plugins that are like plug-in VU meters that just are sort of, modeled to respond as though it's a VU and not, not as quick as it needs to be.
So this is a pretty essential step then if you're taking this on a show or, on the road.
Yeah, well, I mean,
making sure
it's essential
this-
for day-to-day just because everyone likes to do recalls. Like, everyone wants to, like, take the mix home and listen to it and come back and then do that again and then do that again. And so if we're going to do this, we need to know that, like, I can open up a mix and it's pretty much the same that it was, and I can make these, like, very fine tuning adjustments that people want made.
Okay.
Whereas if, like, we have a few different engineers working at the studio, and if everyone had a different system, it would just be absolute madness.
Gotcha.
And like Brian was saying, like, you would think that you could just put them on a line, but I just calibrated, and this is what all of the channels being equal looks like.
Yeah, if everybody looks at that, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So they're kind of seemingly all over the place. But that's the reality,
Yeah.
right? What can happen with us, we have a 40-year-old console, right? So over time, every channel lags and changes and is a little bit different. But the real standard is how far you need to push up that channel in order to reproduce the tones, the consistent tone. So
Do you guys get the MCI console like serviced a lot? Does it generally get brought back to that level and then it just drifts over time?
it sort of does, it sort of doesn't. I
Okay.
mean, we spend about $2,500 a year servicing the console.
Gotcha. And is that part of the
Is that
servicing?
generally
What's that?
Is that part of the servicing that you guys
take
get
it?
each
No.
channel
I
to-
take it later.
It's really
at certain
not.
points,
Okay.
but generally I mix
The
pretty
given,
quiet. Yeah.
the
think
given
that's
is that things are gonna change.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and there's
for
no
sure.
fighting it.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
even like
Yeah.
science
It's
behind
like wearing
why that
old
works.
boots. They just wear in.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
Right, exactly, it is. It's just part
Matt, are
of it.
the faders in Pro Tools, are they like linked to the faders on here?
No. So all this is we're just funneling. It's just a big organizational funnel, and these tracks right
This is
here, the
already
red ones.
interesting.
Are they?
Those
These
are
are
what's but routed into
Yeah.
the
yeah, exactly. So they're just master outputs, and all it is I've selected like the drums go to the drum one, the bass goes to the drum, and I can use this as like a group, a batch. Like this would be me turning down everything to the console,
Yeah.
turning up everything to the console. But really, it just gives us a place to put these signal generators. And Brian sometimes likes to put EQs on here.
Okay.
It would be like a group filtering. So it's all organizational.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And are these all grouped together? Or you like what do you do on one affects all of them?
No.
No.
The only thing that I do is I sometimes group them so that the volumes are the same,
Gotcha. Okay.
but the individual inserts are not grouped.
Gotcha,
Yeah,
okay.
those would be unique.
Cool.
Yeah.
So why don't we pull all the, why don't we just start from scratch and just pull all the audio down, and just like build the mix.
Everyone's so quiet.
Hi.
That usually makes me nervous.
You don't want to miss anything.
This coffee is making me like freak out a little bit.
Run for a little bit.
Also route the two bus to the back somehow, or is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, should be. Yeah, it should be out there, right? John, this coffee's awesome, but it's also making me freak out like that cold brew did a little bit yesterday.
Yeah, it's like lighter roast. I think there's a little bit more.
There's a lot more. It's great. I love it. I'm accustomed to it and I'm used to it, but
I really like
even
that one.
even so, it's great.
Do you want me to go as far as to just start with like a kick drum?
Yeah, let's start with kick drum.
You say freak out, are you like jumpy or something? Like,
Yeah. So I'm gonna like grab a donut.
Alright.
It's a healthy
Yeah, I get it.
thing to
I think so.
counterbalance that.
Um,
So yeah, why don't we start with the kick in, and let's do the processing that you would do.
okay. Yeah. So we can start with the EQ. The reason why I paused is because I've been doing so much more group stuff. But on the way in here, normally I would start with a high pass filter. But I did do that on the way in. So I did it at what seems to be like 30 hertz because there's really not that much usable stuff down there. And it takes up a lot of headroom. So I would have like cleaned that out already. What Brian's method is to do a high pass, a low pass, and then take out something in the middle that you might not need.
Usually in the low mids.
Yeah, usually in the low mids. So we've already done the high pass.
So is there any reason not to do the high pass again?
It wouldn't probably really do much. I can do it if you would like
Just
to
do
just
it.
do it.
Yeah, I would say just do it.
Alright, so probably just do something up around 30. This is 34. The number is sort of just variable. You go until you hear like too much getting sort of cut out.
Too much of a change.
Yeah. So yeah, what I would say is the thing about when you're in the recording mindset is like you don't want to do too much. In the mixing mindset, you really need to make up for the fact that you're gonna need to subtract sonically, in order to kind of like fit it all in, make it potent, powerful, an appropriate utilization of your headroom and all your space. So that's why I know I get sort of pushback for it all the time, but that we did that high pass filter while we were tracking, for me it doesn't matter. You just do it again. Again, like you sort of listen for so our general process, and it's gonna reproduce. It's gonna duplicate itself again and again and again, and it's gonna seem like, oh my gosh, but you already did that. But there's really no reason not to filter out the especially because we don't know really this room that well, right? And we don't know, there's a lot of unknowns, right? At this point, what I would say is our general approach to EQing is always going to be the same thing. It's going to be you filter out the stuff in the track that you don't need at the very low end of the spectrum. You filter out the stuff in the high end the same way, in the very high end of the spectrum, the stuff that's not attached to the instrument, it might just be hiss and noise. And down low, it might be like just rumble. It's rumble that could be like noise in the preamps, or it could be, So essentially, filter out the low stuff, filter out the high stuff, and then, start by picking a place. I generally select in the low mid-range for each instrument that's just not useful or it's problematic. So it doesn't hurt to filter out, even if we already filtered out 30 hertz yesterday, it doesn't hurt to filter it out, because the worst thing that can happen is it's just not there again, right?
Should we move on?
What were you going to say, bro? You had a question.
Are there typical low mids that you immediately start looking for?
Actually, what we do is, so let's go through the steps, right?
Yeah.
We already filtered out the low stuff. Already filtered out the high stuff.
I'll probably pull it down here.
Right? We're listening to the kick in mic, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to roll that high filter back until we hear it touching the kick drum. And then we'll kind of like open it up a little bit to just make sure we're not, again, to make sure that this high and this low is, for the most part, is just grabbing the stuff outside of the instrument itself.
So that ended up around 8K. And then what we'll do is I usually grab the orange one because it's the low mid, and I'll start boosting up in a range where I think I hear some stuff that sounds bad, sort of precisely like that, which sounds terrible, and I'll just pull it down.
Do the push up, the boost up a little more extreme, just so people can.
Yeah.
Do you mind throwing out numbers?
Yeah,
Because
sure. That's
people-
180 hertz.
That's 180?
Yeah. Which
If you scroll around with it a little bit.
Is it going higher?
No, go low. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you keep the cue when you're at this point at a certain?
I actually just leave it. Well, this one I tightened up a little bit because I had already started to move on.
Yeah.
But I do just generally do the default like 1
Okay.
or a hair tighter than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you look for the fundamental
No.
and avoid it?
No, what we do is we listen. So that's a good question, right? The fundamental is a philosophical approach that some people will take. What we would sort of prefer to just do is boost it, make it as ugly as possible by boosting, find the ugliest thing that we can create by boosting that, find the ugliest thing possible. And that's going to basically tell us that's the most unwelcome thing in this recording of the kick drum.
So it's basically like you're searching for like what's already
Searching
bad,
for the worst thing we can possibly find, and then
taking it out.
bringing it down a little bit, not dramatically,
Okay.
not bringing it completely out,
Okay.
but making a cut there.
And this is known as subtractive EQ.
Yeah.
Right.
We predominantly do subtractive EQ. A way to think of it is like use subtractive EQ if you want to make something sound better, and additive if you want to make it sound just different.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And generally you want to make things sound better because you've made them sound the way
Okay.
you want them to sound generally when you're tracking.
Especially when people are paying you to have something sound
Sure,
good.
yeah. Yeah, different is cool though.
And it's kind of
Subtractive is
subjective.
usually corrective. Additive is usually creative.
Yeah.
Right? Is
Sure,
that fair?
It's
I
kind-
think so, yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of subjective to go, what's ugly and what's not.
Well, look
Yeah,
at
so-
When we hear that, but yesterday you used the term,
Resonant frequencies.
the frequency was like really saturated.
Right.
And so that kind of language helps me.
Yeah.
As opposed to just going, oh, that sounds
Exactly.
like crap. Everything I push
Yeah,
up
totally,
like that
yeah.
sounds
Exactly.
like crap.
I
Sometimes I'm yanking it all out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna re-record it 'cause I don't have it.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a good point. I think, this process is, we're kind of trying to make, we're trying to like work in the extreme to an extent that there is no subjective. That is definitely distorting, or that is definitely resonating in a bad way, or that is definitely a bad thing.
That helped me yesterday when you said that.
Yeah, so I think that's what this boost here is right now. You can even like boost it even more, right? And just like, you hear how there's that kind of spiraling thing? Pull it, like just sort of move it around a little bit. Go down a little lower. Go up a little higher. Like do it slowly. Like, there you go. Like so.
Where you at now, numbers?
146.
Yeah, and again,
46?
and the only reason that I'm hesitant to throw out those numbers is I don't want anybody writing down like, okay, always take out 146.
But I want them out there to be able to know what they're hearing.
Got it.
They
Okay.
can't see the screen.
Yep.
Careful, Santa.
That's pretty ugly.
Can I ask a philosophical question about the sub? Because you're mixing with a sub. and we were talking yesterday about like, obviously, like people do it. Sometimes it feels better, like more hype. So like it feels good when you're mixing, but might not be accurate. We're mixing the kick drum with a sub on right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's your opinion?
The only assumption that we're gonna make is that sub's correct.
Mm.
If it's like we've already assumed that these
It's
speakers.
conservative. It might not be correct, but
That's
it's
fine.
Well,
conservative.
I think we're here though, right? We're here in this place now,
Yeah.
and the assumption is that thing is correct.
Okay.
It might change, but where we are right now, the assumption is those speakers and that sub
that?
are correct.
Yeah.
Have you been mixing with the sub on this whole time?
It's been on the
Did you
whole time.
record that?
Yeah,
You
so if I
recorded
take it off, it sounds like this.
So here's my question.
And throw it back on.
Yeah, I can feel it. I can kind of feel it on my
That's
feet.
well,
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's pretty.
So my question is, like, most of the time, if I'm mixing something, which once again, in realm of hip hop, I'm using a lot of heavy bass, a lot of
Yeah.
808s. You know what I mean? I have heard that it's not a good thing to mix in Dre beats because they have a bigger bass sound in them. But they're so comfortable, and I just love them.
Well, reference mixing. So your references are your references.
Right.
You just if you like it,
Right.
like Matt has a great bunch of references that he's always putting on, like from his music collection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he knows that one of his favorite set of references to listen to, he'll actually say, "Yeah, it sounds great. But that's too much bass."
Mm.
In other words, you need to start registering in your brain,
Right.
hey, that Dre beat is awesome, but you know what? It's too much. And when I try to do it at that same level, it blows up car speakers, or it doesn't sound right, right? So that's the thing, that like, you know, mixed references are honestly everything. If you like something, then go for it. And literally have it be in your recording while you're working, and just be matching it constantly. And that doesn't mean you're going to sit and listen to it a ton in your recording. You're going to flip it on for like 5 seconds and be like, whoa, their subs are way lower than ours. Okay. Just match it.
Does everyone know what he means by a reference? It's like a track that you really like.
Yeah.
You just put it right in the project you're working on.
Yeah.
A stereo track.
Yeah.
Or you figure out how to listen to it in your project.
He is talking about his headphones, though. His headphones have, or
Dre beat
they're Dre beat
Oh, the Dre Beat headphones.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, Beats. Right. Yeah.
So, but here's
Well,
my,
it's the thing that's just, if you're gonna use those as reference monitors,
right.
then they are what they are.
Got you.
You know, you have to. That's the choice you're making when you choose a set of speakers, or choose a sub, or choose those headphones.
You could calibrate in your ears.
Yeah, that's just the choice you're making. Like, oh well, it sounds good in these. Any good engineer or producer is always going to have 3 or 4 of them to go reference. They're going to go get in their car and then hear how it sounds there, and then they're going to go to their friend's house and hear how it sounds there.
So, second question: how do you get a nice bass and kick? Blend. You know what I mean? Like, what can you compromise in a song?
We're gonna go there. We're gonna get there.
Okay.
We're not there yet.
Okay, my bad.
Hey, why don't you pull that chair forward and just open that door all the way? Does that make sense? It'll help airflow in here, right?
I didn't know this was going to happen.
Okay, so Matt's gonna zip through stuff now a little bit to make up a little bit of time, but that's the kick in, right? So he's gonna solo up the kick out and kind of do relatively the same thing. There's not that many tracks in this recording, so.
And on the kick in, you're focusing more on that attack, sound.
You know what? This is interesting, right? When we recorded yesterday, we had a purpose for the kick in. It was the attack, right? And we had a purpose for the kick out. It was for more of that round, pillowy thing. So that purpose is already preordained.
Okay.
Now, we're just tightening it up.
Is he on the sum, or is he on the? Is he at the sum, or is he on the?
He's on
the
individual
kick in?
tracks.
Individual
Yeah,
tracks.
individual tracks right now.
For individual tracks
Okay,
right now.
so say that last part again.
So in other words, now it's just tightening up those sounds.
You went to a
They all had their purpose. See,
Yeah, this is one I usually use. I just didn't realize that they had it on here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
if you remember, like while we were recording, all of the instruments that we were recording had a purpose in the mix. We're thinking about the mix while we were recording them. Now he's here, they've already been thought, like what their role and what their purpose is has already been pre-figured out. Now it's just tightening them up. And so, yeah, like, you know, this EQ has an analyzer. That's helpful, right? Gotta be careful not to be, Matt and I have gotten ourselves in trouble when we first got it. It's dangerous, like, you can be too responsive to the pictures, and you just gotta be careful about that. But I think it's a good rule of thumb, in general, on a first pass of a mix, to make one high pass cut, one low pass cut, and generally pick the low mid frequency that you can make the most problematic and just make a cut there, you know.
It's like a variable snare. Keeps running away from it. That's probably pretty bad.
This EQ is called Fab Filter. What's the
Pro Q2.
Pro? It's awesome.
And they have a Pro Q3 now.
Right. I haven't made that move. Is it dynamic?
I don't know. I actually haven't made a move on it.
It is
either.
dynamic. It is. The new one.
Do you use it?
I used it too. I love it.
I think it also has a feature that, I think the more helpful thing is, it has a feature where you can visualize whatever you're working on with respect to another track. So in other words, you could see where the subs are in your bass track while you're working on the subs in your guitar track.
Whoa.
And that's
Like your
helpful.
kick is going and you can
Yeah.
dip it where the kick fundamental is. And,
Yeah. So while Matt's doing this, I'm gonna, and you know, something I'm deeply guilty of is just overthinking things or over philosophizing things. And so when I get adamant about like simplifying things, it's only because I overcomplicate things, right? But here's, you know, a little bit of something that I've discovered.
Sorry, can you just talk this hair quieter?
A little bit of something that I've discovered over the, you know, teaching mixing over the last couple of years is, so step one, choose what your center elements are and what your side elements are, right? So we've already chosen the center elements of our mix are the kick, snare, bass, and lead vocal. Everything else is a side element. In explaining how you make certain elements work together, right? In explaining, and I wish I had a whiteboard for this or something, but in explaining how you make certain elements work together, you know, we are basically an explanation of why and how the kick and the bass work together. The kick and the bass are both center elements, and they both operate in a lot of the same frequencies, but one of them is percussive and the other is melodic. So that's a key distinction, right? When you're thinking about what instruments go where, right? You can have a percussive instrument and a melodic instrument that share common qualities go into the same place. What you can't do is have two sub-frequency heavy melodic instruments go to the same place. So what is, you know, so that would be almost like if you had a bass guitar and a synth bass, right? That's sort of like, in some ways, while everybody does it, while a lot of people do it, that's in some ways a breakdown of like the fundamental sort of like arrangement concept of those instruments. So for us, it'd be highly unlikely, as we were recording yesterday, it'd be highly unlikely for us to record a bass guitar and then be like, and we're going to do now let's do a synth bass. Because for us, that center element of the sub-frequencies is already spoken for. It's the bass guitar. You know, the melodic sub-frequency instrument is the bass guitar, right? Now, it does often happen that we'll be mixing a record for somebody and they've gone and done a bass guitar and a synth bass. And so then we've got to figure out how to handle that. And it usually ends up happening that we're going to choose one of them is going to be the center melodic instrument, and the other one has to have the subs kind of taken out of it, and it has to be relegated to the sides.
So you a panning. Do you have, when it comes to panning, do you have like a
With us, panning is generally, the panning we did yesterday while we were recording was left, center, or right. Hard left, hard right, or center.
so is it
The
to taste?
mixing, what's that?
Is it to taste?
No,
Okay.
no, it's practical. You know, we're thinking about the arrangement. We're thinking about panning with respect to the arrangement. Hard left, hard right, or center.
Gotcha.
In mixing, we're generally going to follow that same panning structure. You know, what we might do is, by the end of it, we might soften the hard panning of an instrument or two. But generally, things are going to be hard panned, left, hard right, hard left, or center. The one exception is our 3-mic overhead technique. The panning of the side elements is not hard left or hard right. It's panned at about like 40 or 30 or 40 or 50, something like that. And that's a whole other conversation for a whole other time. It doesn't have clear answers. That's more
Anchor
theory.
center on that.
What's that?
Anchor center.
Yeah, yes,
Just
the
to help
center.
keep it from
Yep.
being too muddy in the low end.
What's that?
Like always doing a high pass filter on the bass instruments. Is that to keep it from being too
Yeah, because
muddy?
like down there, down there it's just like rumble.
Gotcha.
It's not very useful.
Okay.
No, like, unless it's like an electronic kick drum or something, nothing will ever have like actual punch down there, and most
Gotcha.
speakers can actually reproduce it. So the headroom is worth, like not having that space occupied is worth the not having it.
Gotcha. Cool.
You see how the analyzer has like a grayed out area that shows you the difference between what was there to start with and what's there afterwards.
Oh, gotcha.
So when he pulls it down, right, what you'll start to see.
Doesn't need much, but
Yeah,
if I was to pull something, right, you can see that it goes down.
right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so the thing, if you keep it there for a second, right, the concept to keep in mind is that difference that it's showing you, if you're subtracting, then that difference is headroom that gets added back to your mix.
Yeah.
So that's why subtractive EQ is so powerful, right? If in general, we almost exclusively use subtractive EQ. And don't get caught up in like the platitude of it. Don't get caught up in like Brian's setting up rules, right? Just get caught up in the idea that, you know, what makes a really solid mix is how much headroom it has. And so every time you see a subtractive difference between what was there and what we've changed, that difference is being added back to your headroom and your mix is getting stronger because of it. So,
Should I leave out outboard for right now?
yeah, leave it out for right now.
Speaking of headroom, I noticed that I don't know if you're not there yet, but you're not gating anything on the drums, leaving kind of a lot of.
No, we're not.
Is that a stylistic choice, or is that for
Um,
this song, or?
We don't very
What do you mean by
often
gaining?
Gating.
Oh, gating.
Gating.
That's funny you say that because I thought about putting an expander on the snare, but I was just gonna keep it simple. We don't gate toms. We just cut them. We cut all the noise out. And sometimes I'll put an expander on a kick and a snare just because gates to me are just too much.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Too
like
extreme.
like the sound of the that it does whenever it opens.
Yeah.
So I'll just do an expander, which, for those that are unfamiliar, a gate is just something that pulls audio down until it crosses over a threshold that you define, and then it lets the signal through. So you can these drum mics have a lot of bleed in them. The kick has a lot of other drums in it, and you can sort of tighten things up by turning down that bleed, and then only letting the kick through whenever the kick's there. A gate is the kind of thing that cuts out pretty much everything until the kick is there, and an expander is just a less aggressive version of that. It's just kind of turns it down and then lets it come back up.
Yeah.
So I usually prefer expanders. I don't know
Expanders
why.
are a little more subtle.
I don't know why they have a different name. They're the same processor, just used differently.
Gating is extreme expansion, right?
Yeah.
Do we even have time to do?
I can
an
do one real
example
quick.
on the snare.
Yeah. So you hear all that stuff's in there, right? The
Here's
extra
kick.
non-snare stuff.
This is the soloed up snare.
So this is a gate.
Oh, like
Right.
a really hard cut.
Yeah. Which, in the context of this is probably fine because you have the overheads in the rooms. But I don't usually use overheads in rooms, it's so loud. So what'll be easier is if I take this range and I make it just so that it's making it a little bit quieter.
Gotcha.
So you're up to something like that. And I'll probably make it. Compared to,
Gotcha, yeah.
See,
Cuts
the
out a
snare-
lot of the extra stuff.
yeah, the snare is no punchier or no different here. It just has a lot of extra shit in it. Same snare, you just turned everything else down basically.
Gotcha. Is that standard practice for a drum kit?
Yeah,
It's a
people
common
do
thing.
often. People do often do that on kick, snare, all the closed mics.
Okay.
But yeah, and a really helpful tip I think for me, which really learned this sooner. This plugin is in any major
Can't hear you,
software.
but. Here, hit stop. Are you guys trying to get a.
Can you hear me at all?
I can hear you right now, just through the wall.
I just want to make mention that I've been in sessions where they've gone to the extreme of actually automating the mutes.
Oh wow. Yeah, I would never be able to. I would never have the desire. Yeah, I would just leave. But you do what works, right?
Will you say what he suggested?
Well, he was just saying that he was once in a session where they went as far as to automate the mutes, which would be a painstaking process that would probably take me an hour and a half to 2 hours just for something that a processor, if you have it, can do it in 30 seconds. But this type of thing comes in most major DAWs, and I really wish someone would have just told me there are easy settings for this. The attack should almost always be at the fastest you can make it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Very little reason for it not to be.
And attack is how long the signal is lasting?
No, it's how quickly it opens.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha.
And so when I open this, the very first thing I do is I set the attack to the fastest it'll go. It really should just default to that. And then you mess with the hold and the release. And all that's doing is you're just making it so that it sounds natural. If I play this, and I have too short of those,
Gotcha, just kind of cuts it
it doesn't sound natural at all, yeah. So if I sort of open these up, just make them last a little longer, that's how you get the snare sound, and then it pulls back down.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And all it is hold is how long, once it's open, how long it stays fully open. And then release is once it starts closing, how long does it take for it to go back down to the quiet volume.
Gotcha, okay.
So that's an easy way that no one ever told me.
But yeah.
All through college.
Shoot.
So
And
it's
you
strictly
just sort of
time
pick it up.
based and not a threshold.
It does have a threshold, which is over here, and that is if I have that too far, you'll never hear the snare. And if I have it too open, it'll never close. Right, so you just want to get it so that when the snare hits, it opens, but not when the snare's not hitting, it is remaining closed.
And then it's time-based is the release and the hold. So, yeah, the hold will just stay open it'll hold open for a certain amount of time, and then the release.
You're listening for how much of that sound you want.
Yeah.
Right.
In fact, on
snare.
our computer and most people's computers, there's a bug in Pro Tools with a Mac OS where when you open a gate, all the meters start going like this, so you actually have no visual aid. And if you try and look at the screen, you will get dizzy. So you have to use your ears. It's just it's a wacky thing. But hopefully this doesn't confuse it more. But a gate is in the same family as a compressor. They're both dynamics processors. So they're like cousins. They share all the same controls. It's just what they do with them.
And I guess you could show what we would do with the floor tom, because there is a floor tom track, right?
Yeah.
So in the floor tom,
there's only one floor tom hit, and I did it last night.
Oh, okay.
So
in lieu
I'll
of
just show
gating,
you.
yeah. In lieu of gating the toms, right?
Yeah.
So if you solo up a moment of that track, that sound is just going at all times, and that's not an ideal component of the rest of your drum sound or the rest of your snare sound or the rest of your kick sound. So what we end up doing is just deleting all the audio except for where he hits the tom. That's like gating.
Just in a way that is very controlled. So he only hit the floor tom one time, and that's over here. So what I'll do is I'll go over to it, and I can see it here. It's this area. And Pro Tools has a really handy feature that I honestly don't know if it's in other softwares. It's called tab to transient.
Yeah, it's not in Logic.
And what I can do is I can just keep hitting the tab key, right? And here's my cursor. It'll just keep going to the next transient.
Oh, wow.
And I can cut right there. I can go over here till the next one after the tom and cut, fade, and then I just mute out everything else.
Oh, wow.
And then I'm done.
That was fire.
Yeah. And so usually there's more toms, and there's a rack tom, and it takes 5 minutes or something like that, and you go through the whole song. But then you know that it's like, it's going to open and close when you want it. You're the gate. You just decided.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So instead of using a plug-in, you just do it manually.
Just do it.
Have complete control.
And it cleans up a lot of the sound. If a drummer had 3 toms and you had 3 tom mics, you can make a lot of headway just by removing all that extra audio.
Yeah. Really clean up the mix.
I think one thing to also point out is we recorded this yesterday, and if everybody remembers, we spent a few minutes making sure that all our drum mics were in phase, right? But when we're mixing a record that somebody brings to us, the first thing we do is get all of their audio tracks in phase. And it's funny because it's usually in the first 5 minutes of mixing that the client will be like, I don't know what you did, but you just made our drums sound way better. And it's literally in the first 5 minutes.
Points. What are those called?
You know?
Bands?
Yeah, sure. You can call them bands. Yeah, like this is a filter. Yeah, bands would be probably a good way to talk about it.
Are you sweeping in each band and each frequency range?
Yes.
Yeah, usually. Sometimes like my ear will, like, I can gravitate towards ranges. But then I'll usually sort of like
look for bands.
Like in this one I hear 2, but I might just pick one for right now, and that'll be the lower one, which is this stuff. It's just an excess. It doesn't need to be there. So I'll sort of just like.
That's in the guitar, right?
Yeah.
You just you're carving out room.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. Headroom is just room for other things, basically.
Exactly. I mean, the ideal thing is to get to a place where you can solo up an instrument, and you can just hear like, oh wow, it's congested it's got like congestion of this frequency. You can just start to zero in on like, well, that's an ugly frequency, particularly for a guitar. So let's cut a little bit there.
So much of the time, the keyword is a little bit.
What's that?
Seems like so much of the time, the keyword is a little bit. You know,
Yeah,
it's all of
yes.
it's a cumulative effect
Yeah.
of all these little nudgings. And
In fact, you know, what we were saying sort of earlier about compression, you know, I've sort of, in my mixing class at the school I teach at, I've kind of started to tell kids, like, don't worry about compression until we get into class. Because everybody overdoes it. And same thing is often true for the EQing. Like, a little bit goes a very long way, you know? When I first started recording on the mixing console that I record on all the time, my partner would tell me, he'd be like, do what you want to do on the EQs on the console. And they're stepped, the EQs, right? So he'd be like, get it the way you want it, and then just like split the difference back to, you know, nothing. So if the way I wanted it, and this was just in the training of my young ear, if the way I wanted it was to like cut 6 dB of a low mid frequency, he'd be like, okay, now go back and make that a 3 dB cut, and just trust that, you know. So he's making some ugliness there for sure. A lot of that stuff, gross, right? But you hear that? Do you hear that? The ugliness of those frequencies. Like, ugh, right? When's that ever going to be a good thing? Doesn't mean we want to cut it out all the way. We're just using that process to isolate it.
See, but what I'm thinking is like, a lot of it depends on who you are, and you know what I'm saying? Because I know hip-hop artists who have taken, like, one of my favorites is XXXTentacion, and he's famous for using just real bad distortion, like stuff that I think any engineer would like cringe at.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But he was kind
try
of like
to just
doing
bring
like
them into
metal,
kind of like
screamo
where the
kind of
majority
rap.
of
You know what I mean?
because I noticed
So it worked.
like you
The
kind of
distortion
stopped
worked.
it as you
Well,
approached.
The other interesting
the
thing is,
frequency.
usually
Sort of works out
it's
that way.
in context.
When we
So-
say we got in trouble.
So
with
he's
CQ.
famous for that, but not on every track in the whole song.
Not on every track.
On one thing.
Right, exactly.
So
He'd
keep
be
that
like,
in
"Go
mind,
up until the thing.
right?
It sort of corresponds. It doesn't always correspond.
Gotcha.
But
We
yeah,
can-
it generally ends up working out that way.
Okay.
We can go through this whole process, and what we're doing is
But
we're
electric guitars,
being
you can have
we're
access
we're
up there. This is a ribbon mic. If you showed me this and didn't tell me
I'll
which
let you.
microphone it was, I would probably be able to say it's a ribbon mic, just because that's usually how they roll off.
Oh, interesting.
And that's why everyone likes them for guitars. Is you generally don't need like 12K on a guitar.
Right, yeah.
It sounds, yeah, it'd be crazy.
Really crazy.
But sometimes people use condenser mics and things like that, which will have it. So I would still pull this down, and I would probably end up cutting a good bit out of the guitar if you use a condenser or something like that, just because I know that I don't need that. And up
like
there,
a 12 dB or like a 24?
this is a 12. It just defaults to a 12. I usually use 6 or 12.
Also, can you route your talkback to like 3 or something like that? So
Did I not do that already?
No, it's there. It's just it's mixed in on 1 and 2. So sometimes
Oh.
it mixes in, I can't hear you. So
Yeah,
like,
so...
sorry.
That's okay.
It's like 4 or 5.
Alright, so let's see.
I appreciate it.
You want to swap out?
No, it sounds great.
Oh, is it because the
It's like,
pneumatic?
yeah, we have the 2 bus in there, so it's
So now it should be on 3.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, so if the guitar has all that, what I would then define as an excess of high frequency, that's going to start getting in the way of the vocal, the drums up there, and the cymbals, and then you have masking, which is an issue, and one of the sole reasons that we do the subtractive EQ is this thing has too much of this frequency that this other thing needs.
Gotcha.
Right,
So
so
it kind of
like-
like covers up.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, hence masking. Gotcha.
Hence masking.
Yeah, I see what you did.
Yeah.
I think the thing with that, with those real steep filter, like cute, like cuts that he does.
Yeah.
I think that is particularly important that when he's making those cuts, he's doing it based on what he's hearing and not on what he's seeing in the pictures.
Yeah.
Like in those filter cuts in particular, those like, what do they call those when they're real narrow?
Notches.
Like those notches.
Gotcha.
That notch filtering,
Yeah.
I'm gonna say, like, it's really problematic to make those based on pictures. It's really important to make those based on what he's hearing.
Yeah.
And me and Matt do not make those same cuts, and that's fine.
Yeah.
He's really judicious with those. He really knows how to hone in. Those notch filters, that's pro shit. And honestly, everybody else could skip it for now.
Facts.
While you're learning things,
Yeah.
right? While you're learning things.
Which is why I didn't talk about it.
Right.
Yeah.
While you're learning things, you know, high pass, super important. Low pass, super important. Picking that ugliest frequency that's creating resonant buildups in the low mids, that's important. You could skip everything else.
Gotcha.
And wait till you get where Matt is in a little while to start being careful about those. Never focus on those.
Gotcha.
Focus on the nuts and bolts. Lows, highs, and the low mids.
Gotcha.
You know?
Okay, awesome.
So this is just that guitar room. I realized I skipped over it in case we want to add
Yeah.
some of that in there.
And would you EQ the room for the guitar similar to you would the ribbon on the guitar?
No, I do different.
You do different, okay.
Yeah, because at that point I almost would define it as a different source. It's like,
Gotcha.
or a completely
Okay.
different take on the same source.
Yeah. It might be in the corners where there might be a lot of low mid buildup that's just not on the guitars.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Right?
Which is exactly what happens. So, if I show you here, this is the room, right? If I take this out, so if you hear that, there's a lot of this.
Ugh, hear
Gotcha.
that?
Yeah. Okay, like that resonance.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, and that is just like eating headroom. Like it's eating
Just
so much
gobbling
headroom.
away, man.
And
Okay.
also it will, though I just know from like, you know, historical knowledge that this range sounds awful in a car and it sounds awful on pretty much any speaker that doesn't cost like $4,000 to $6,000. Like,
Gotcha.
so you just, you have so many reasons to just like
Mhm.
decrease it. It's it's
Okay.
bad excess.
Whoops. And by that range, you mean the low mids, essentially.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Like, roughly speaking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before I get to the vocals, do you want to do any of the outboard stuff?
Yeah, why don't we bring the vocal down and let's, so what do you want to try, what do you want to do outboard on?
Well, I'd like to try some of the things we were trying yesterday. I think at this point I can do a parallel if I do the right thing.
Okay.
So, last night, as I patched in the outboard, we sort of started experimenting with some stuff just to get a feel for the equipment. And, you know, we sort of decided on a few things. We're going to try them. And I'm going to see if I can hack the system to make it work. So one of them is a drum parallel bus. Parallel buses are, I think, super useful in a lot of different mixing situations. They effectively allow you to, you know, get super creative or do some
Extreme.
heavy lifting on a, you know, on a group of tracks or on a track, and you just put it on a track that's parallel to it, right next to it. And so you have the original track and your now like heavy lifting track, and you can blend the two.
Gotcha. So, but it's the same like stuff. It just we run at the same time, but you.
So one that we do fairly often is a drum parallel. And what that means is that I can do insane things to the drums if I want. And blend it back in so as to maintain the original, like, punch and feel, like the original snap with the transient, like all the fun shit that drums do.
Right.
But I can blend in this thing that has like no attack to it and is completely slammed and very exciting.
Yeah, gotcha.
And if I was just to use that, like here, if I just demonstrate this, right? This is just the drums with no additional output processing.
Okay.
And then this would be
Oh wow.
what I would imagine as a starting point for the parallel processing. If I just had this, you know, theoretically it could be like too like crushed, or it doesn't have enough of a transient still left to it. So what I can do then is I can blend in the original and figure out a delay thing that's happening.
So let me sort of backtrack a tiny bit, right? Everything that Matt's been doing up till now has been you could describe as very conservative, right? We're taking the very simple audio tracks that we're already focused on yesterday, and we're just tightening them up. We're taking a conservative approach to like making them sort of even more perfect versions of what we were kind of initially going for with them yesterday. That is what I would call being conservative, right? That's a conservative approach. When we start talking about the parallel tracks, we're talking about doing something very extreme, right? So if you pull down that parallel track for 1 second, right? If everybody remembers back to what we were recording yesterday, right? Turn up the volume of the overall mix for a second, right? If everyone remembers what we were doing yesterday, this is not that different than what you can forget all of the all the stuff that we've taken out. It's sort of like we've already forgotten about that stuff, because this is a conservative, this is a more idealized version of a conservative idea that we started with yesterday. When we then bring in that parallel track, like,
I guess it might sound a little funny right now. I gotta figure it out.
Okay.
It's a delay compensation issue.
Can you solo up the parallel track again one more time? Right? So, when we're talking about the parallel track, we didn't do that yesterday. We weren't hearing that, right? This is sort of a more like enlivened and vibrant and like creative and slashy sort of extreme presentation of the drums from yesterday. So the wonderful thing about doing things in parallel is we can do that entire conservative process on a track-by-track basis. Then what we can do is, you know, take a send off of all of those conservatively processed tracks and throw it through something really extreme. The compressors on these two tracks, right? And we can take a blend of those conservative tracks from yesterday and process them really heavily, like throw caution to the wind.
Yeah.
Right? This is not the kind of thing where we go like, oh, is that right? Is that right? No, we're like, fuck it. Slam.
Right, yeah.
Right?
That's what the send is called on Pro Tools.
Yeah.
Fuck it.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so the reason that you can do that extreme thing is because you're maintaining the originals on their own discrete tracks. Those are fundamental to the mix. And then the fuck it track is brought in just a little bit until, I mean, it can be a lot too, but the key component is that because it's in parallel, that literally means we could always take that fader of that extreme effect and just turn it all the way down. We can be like, oh, you know what, we're being crazy, and turn it all the way down and start back from scratch. So that's a little bit of a description of the difference between parallel and you know, and series tracks. You know.
Awesome, thank you.
So what we're trying to do now is blend that parallel track in.
And usually I can do it.
Well, Matt, what your one idea last night was
To print it.
what if we print it? We're not going to get into like the nuances of like, oh, why is it combing? Because that's like some fundamental weird thing. We have a theory that if we take that really extreme tracks that we just did, and if we print those, why don't you EQ out some of the nonsense from the printed tracks too? Or from the tracks that we're going to print? right?
EQ out some of the nonsense.
Well, in other words, put an EQ before that so you can get rid of some of that, like some of the stuff that you know you're not going to want to use.
Okay.
I mean, you can also do that.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Solo it up so they can hear what you're going to cut out too. So he's going to, that's an extreme track, but he's going to sort of clean it up a little bit. Yeah.
Situations where you're not working on your console, do you reach for any plugins that add some of the character and the color that your console might add?
I don't think of it that way, but probably the answer would be like yes.
Or how? Well, a better way to ask it then is like, how would you make up for that color that you might get from a console, your own console, that in a setting where you don't have your console? How would you do it?
I think we don't really think about that. Like what we think about is like just where we are in the present right now.
What tools you have and how does it sound?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
like that all of these.
Because we're like running through.
For me,
they're coming back in on the follow channel.
I know it sounds like operating from a point of privilege, right? Because we have this console, we have all this equipment, right? But like he has a console, he doesn't have nearly as much stuff as we have, but I would love to go over to his place and do stuff because I'd be like, I would look for the physical, the hardware, the things in the real world that he has, and I'd be like, I'm just gonna focus on those. I'm not gonna get hung up on like reproducing what my console does with a bunch of plugins. I would instead be like, well, he's got this real kind of elegant, simple system, and I'm just gonna look for the nuance, the things of that. I'm not going to go into his studio and try to make his console sound like my console.
That's interesting.
Or I'm not going to go into working in the box situation and be like, well, how do I get my console in there? I think that's a fool's errand. I think you just kind of
I love that.
You move past that.
It's great. You know? I think the
less
marketing,
is more.
The marketing of plugins is like, you need to get this saturated sound that you don't in the box that you can't get without a console, and so you need to continually reach for recreating that. You have to recreate that,
and I think that's a little insidious.
Oh, I think it is too, and I
mean, not that they're
appreciate
bad people,
answer.
but
yeah.
you know.
But it makes you rely on their
Absolutely.
their definition of what your mix should sound like.
Yeah.
I think to a certain degree.
Part of me is always like thinking like, all right, you know, my exit strategy for like. You know, I've got a studio and console, like I said, costs me about $2,000 just to keep it running every year. And the rent at the studio costs about, $2,000 a month. And all these things, they add up. If I were going to, like, come up with an exit strategy, part of me is like, I would get that, like, that Soundcraft mixer that he has. And I would get, I have this, like, I would get a...
Yeah, so printing just means, like, we're running the tracks out through the outboard and we're recording them back in on 2 new tracks.
Yep.
Just called printing.
So part of my strategy is like, I would get a mixer like he has. I would get like a 1-inch 8-track tape machine that I know there's a few of them out there in the world and not that many people are really interested in them anymore. And I would get a 2-track, tape machine. And I'd be like, I'm going to figure out how to make this work. Those 3 things. Fuck everything else. Like, definitely... I have a really hard problem with software, and this is where maybe you and I would be in agreement, right? A really hard problem with software that keeps insisting you need to upgrade it and you need to get the newest version of it. You know, he's working off an operating system for how long ago? Like your
it's
probably
5 or 6 years old.
5 or 6 year old operating system. You know?
Which if you have a dedicated computer for recording, it's not as problematic as if you use your computer for other studio tasks.
Yeah.
Like keeping whatever other software you're using. But once you get really serious with it, I think it feels like having a dedicated computer for just music software.
Makes all the sense in the world.
Like we try to do that with this. And Spotify got on there, other things have got.
Well, and all your video stuff too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's all running out here.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, like at Minor Street, right? like I'm saying that we have a console that costs us $2,000 a year to keep running. What kind of computer do you guys imagine we have at Minor Street to run Pro Tools and all that stuff? What computer are you picturing? And like old, new, like the brand newest, highest end? No, we don't. We have a computer that anybody in this room could buy at this point for $250. We do. That's our Mac. It's a Mac Tower. It's not a trash can.
It's a pre-trash can.
I just learned they call it a cheese grater. Right? Mm-hmm. So we have a $200 computer, and it runs the stuff that we need to run just fine. So, yeah, I like that idea of if it were up to me, and again, like, the world didn't always produce rooms full of people trying to figure out how to record come hell or high water, right? That's a phenomenon of right now. Matt and I often lament the fact I teach at a school that spits out, 50 kids every year who are like, I'm in the world of recording now. It's tons of people are entering this field. And my solution for one thing, you have to differentiate yourself. You have to be different. And honestly, it's harder and harder to differentiate yourself when you're reliant on the plugins and the programs and the software that everybody is convinced you have to be embroiled in today. Mm-hmm. Much easier to do. Like, who has the most unique setup in this whole room right now? This guy. He's got a tape machine and a console and a simple Pro Tools system or DAW system that goes with it. Mm-hmm. So for me, my exit strategy would be something like that, because that's not what everybody does. Right now, everybody is very quickly sort of seduced by the pictures on the screen and the game, the programs that are designed using like gaming type of techniques that make you want to keep playing that fucking game all day. And that's antithetical to finishing things. So.
That's a good word. See, I thought tape was a relic. You know what I mean? I didn't know that people even still use tape at all.
Yeah, you can. You can. It's not the same, right? It's not going to be. It's not going. But honestly, if you could craft a process that's based around a tape machine and a console in hip hop, I guarantee you 100% you will be producing stuff that does not sound like anybody else's stuff.
But Kobe sounds like we need to link up, brother. Are you in Canton?
Dover.
Oh yeah. You talked about that. That's not far.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what I'm trying to do. Just get out of it. I don't know if you listen to hip hop at all, but like, a lot of it sounds the same.
It's not, right?
You know what I mean?
I tried.
I'm really trying to
adjusting for samples.
Because like you said,
so it's not
you do
making
have
the
to
sample.
differentiate yourself if you're gonna be in music. Like you can't just be doing what everybody else is doing.
That sounds about right.
No, it's still your phone.
Well, we might not want to get too hung up on it.
It's pretty unfortunate.
If we can't use the outboard gear in parallel, we'd have to figure out why later. Why don't you just replace what these would be doing with something that's distorting them or heavily compressing in parallel for demonstration purposes.
Is it channel 17 that's screwing you up?
No. It's a hardware delay compensation issue. It's like the converters don't know how to talk to Pro Tools. They can't say this is our latency, and this is how long it's physically taking for things to go around. So you end up with delays that cause comb filtering.
It's worth figuring out because all this nice hardware that you're buying, you can use throughout the entire process rather than just on the way in.
Let's see what we have here.
And I know it's doable with UAD systems because at Drexel they had the UAD system, and I was able to use a real LA2A or a LA2A plug-in side by side.
What letter do you spell it, Matt?
I don't know what it would do. So what Matt's doing instead of, if everyone wants to listen for 1 sec, what Matt's doing instead of going to these outboard compressors is he's using a distressor plugin in parallel.
Distressor.
That's just a compressor, and it's a compressor with controls that make really extreme pumpy sounds.
See, what is compression?
Compression is, you know, if all of if the volumes of your sounds of a sound, if the momentary volumes go from down here to up here, right? That's a wide distance, the quietest thing to the loudest thing. Compression just brings this bottom floor up and this top floor down.
Okay.
And now it makes it so the same thing is now conceivable within a narrower range. And when you do it to the extreme, you hear not just the hits themselves, but you hear the moments in between. That's what all that like.
Yeah. So it keeps it at one level pretty much, even though.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
But again, used in the extreme, it's an effect.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a distortion.
I've heard people kind of refer to it as like squashing.
Yeah, the distressor has a nuke button.
Okay.
I'm currently using. But yeah.
It's like a nuke button.
Yeah.
It literally says nuke.
Okay, so back to our concept of in parallel, right? We had all those conservative individual tracks that Matt sort of tailored individually. Now he's taking a blend of all of them and sending them to this one aux track in parallel, and that one aux track he's gonna slam with the distressor plug-in, so that now you have this really mangled sound, but it's on its own fader, so you can turn it all the way down, and then you can bring it in slowly and blend them together.
So it's a mix of the two. Without it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
With it.
Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
So he basically has two buses, pretty much.
Yeah.
And then the other one mimics the first one or whatever. And the other
Well,
one has an effect
so
on it.
look what happens here, right? So all these tracks, see that little drum parallel send?
Right.
He's picking on all of our individual drum tracks, which ones he's going to send to that bus.
Right.
So, and in what quantity, how much of it he's going to send. So he's adding a little kick, a little snare, floor tom, right?
Yep, 4 tom overheads and then rooms.
Right? He's adding a little bit of each. He's blending them. And then on the destination aux track that they're all sending to, he's slamming the shit out of it with the nuke button, with the distressor on nuke. Or you could instead of slamming the shit out of it with a compressor on nuke, you could put a distortion plug-in on there. Or you could use the distortion of an outboard unit if you can figure out how to get it to be, in time and latency is all figured out.
How is that different from a side chain then?
Well, it's sometimes people use them like as like terms that are sort of swappable. A side chain is really a different thing in that side chaining really is more about side chaining would be like if you had a compressor on the kick or on the drum room mic, right? But instead of the drums themselves triggering the compressor, you would side chain over to the vocal, and every time the vocal speaks, that's what triggers the compression on the drums, right? That's what side chaining is. Sounds pretty good though, right? Matt, do you want to put the bass through maybe?
1176 plugin?
Yeah, or just the real 1176 because it's not in parallel. You could bounce it
Right.
back in.
So that's the bass going through this compressor over here.
Right?
This 1176 style compressor.
He's got a super fast release,
And a moderately fast attack.
moderately fast attack. And if you guys can see, you can all take a peek here at the VU meter. It's moving right now. Everybody see that?
It's compressing about 3 dB at the most.
Could actually be more extreme just for, like that's compressing more.
What's the stylistic choice for this song for the compression on the bass? Like, what are you looking to get out of the compressor for this song?
So really, with this one, I don't need much out of it. The only thing that I would need is that there are certain times where some of his notes are quieter than others. And doing like, 3 to 5 decibels of compression is enough that I'm not necessarily like completely altering the envelope of like how he's playing. I'm just sort of evening it out. Whereas the drums, I'm doing like 12, like 15, maybe more. And that's why I'm blending it, because that would be too extreme. This is like relatively, I could show you this and you would probably not be able to say whether it was like compressed or just how he played. And so it's really just to even it out, because bass is, low end is like somewhat fickle, and that's usually what like on different systems is really responding radically differently. And bass itself has a lot of resonance, I think. And certain notes can be way louder than others, and that maybe doesn't even have a lot to do with how they're playing. It can just be the sort of wood it's showing. Makes sense. Cool. And then I guess well, I could probably do it on the guitar too, which was sounded pretty cool yesterday.
Yeah, that did. It sounded great.
But I would plan on doing it on both guitars.
Yeah, because you're not using these anymore.
Yeah, I guess that's true, huh?
Now, what might be problematic is how it blends back with those room mics on the guitars. But maybe for the purposes of today, we don't need them.
So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start routing these guitars out to these UAs, which are, some distortion, some compression. I think that's cool.
Maybe solo them up so they can hear.
Yeah. So, we'll start with this one. Right. This is compressing, and I guess running through a tube, so it's getting some harmonic distortion. But it's not so much distortion. That would be so much distortion, which sounds great. And I think the nice thing about guitars is they can get kind of pokey even if you do use a ribbon and there's some distortion, so compression on cleaner, I would define this as like a cleaner guitar relative to what we work on. So some compression on that is nice. It'll sort of catch some of the like, you hit it too hard and it like comes out a little bit louder. So this is compressing on the fast setting, which is just a quick release. And it's doing like 3 to 6 decibels of compression. And I'm getting like the character of running it through well, I guess it's a tube and a transformer, because I'm in the middle of the thingy. The technical term, the thingy.
Is there a way to A-B? You can't really complete like quick bypass to...
I can do it on here.
Oh yeah.
But
do one at a time, so...
Yeah, let me do that.
Is that 2 guitars or 1?
1.
Okay.
Let's try to get the volume right. So this is before. Oops, always happens. Before with nothing. And then that's with me adding it on. It's not the best demonstration point.
Yeah, go to a heavier moment, I guess.
bit more even.
But it's also got a little bit of like tube saturation about it.
Trying to get the volume. Before, sort of flat. So with the it livens it up a little bit.
Sometimes, one thing that we've discovered, it sort of goes along the lines of like what I was saying about the EQ approach, where like you do it to how you want to hear it, and then you sort of split the difference back to something a little more conservative. Well, along that same line of thinking, to hear how something is behaving, it's really enlightening to hear it in the extreme. But then just know, how far you dial it back to be the practical use of it.
Yeah. Speaking of, I really like the extreme on
We
this.
do like the extreme of it.
So this is John's guitar with just John. And then this is John with a bit more distortion. And he's crying. And yeah, sometimes it's fun to add like some distortion. No. It's the second one, I think. Yeah.
And so this is for John's parallel track, correct? That you're doing this distortion
Actually, on this one, I'm not doing it on parallel.
Gotcha.
I'm just doing it right on the
Okay.
Sometimes with guitars, I get sort of lax on that because you can get away with a lot on a guitar.
Okay.
What do you think is better, the fast or the slow? Here's fast. Here's slow.
I like fast because the reverb comes out.
You guys hear that? It's cool.
So yeah. So it's technically wrong, I think, by most people's books. But it sounds pretty sick. Maybe in this section I would dial it back. But so I'll just print two. I'll print two because I like the one. And then last night we were messing with doing the same thing on the vocal.
Oh wow.
Do you want to do it on her guitar as well?
I have it on her
guitar. Oh, you do have it on her.
Can you clarify what you just said about when you said you liked it in the one section?
Oh yeah, sure. So because this is a piece of hardware, right?
Yeah.
I'll print this in, which just means I record the sound of it running through back in on a new track, so that we don't have to recall it or anything.
For one section.
Yeah, so I'll print it, and then if I want like a different sound, which doesn't really happen that often, but
in a different part of the song,
I'll print it again, and then I'll just like mute it in the section where I don't want it unmuted in the section that I do. So it'll be most of the sound for one part, and then I'll go to the other track for the part that I want that other sound.
this sounds really good though.
Yeah.
Do you want to just drop those in right now?
Print those right now, yeah.
Yeah, let's print them, and then we'll move on to the vocal.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So Pro Tools has a really handy thing that they've added called commit. Love that word. Where I used to have to make tracks, and it was like actually a bit of a thing where you'd have to make these tracks, you'd route them, and then you'd record them and all this stuff. Now I just say like, I like these three, do it for me, and it just does it. And it'll make the new tracks, it'll carry over any sends or anything. It stays very organized for you.
And what it does
just,
is
select
it
and walk away.
deactivates the original and gives you the like printed,
It's one example of software actually really improving on
Absolutely.
itself rather than what we were talking about where it was a little archaic in the sense that you had to do that.
Well, interesting thing about our process is that since we use so much outboard processes, right? And say we have like a rack maybe like this tall, and it's got like a bunch of compressors, a bunch of EQs, and we'll utilize all of them. We'll have the mix running, and everything's running live. And when we commit those tracks, the really amazing thing, again, like the amazing thing about working, in my opinion, working more heavily with, say, a small amount of hardware, but hardware versus software, is that as our process goes along, and you commit those tracks, as our process goes along, we're relieving the computer of processing computer doesn't have to think like, oh, okay, this thing is going to this outboard insert and this thing is going through this plug-in and this. It doesn't get more complicated as it goes along. As our process goes along and we commit the tracks, by the end of our mix, we're really just playing back audio files.
Is that part of why you can get away with the computer that you were talking?
Yes.
Because
Well, to some
you're
degree,
not
yeah.
escalating. You're
part of the reason.
You're dumping it off.
The biggest reason we can get away with that is that we're using a Pro Tools HDX system, and that all the processing power in an HDX system is on a PCIe card that's in the computer. So you can have literally a 10-year-old computer, and all the real processing is being done by the card in the computer that you bought from Pro Tools, that card going in there, from Avid. But the bigger thing is we're committing, as we go along, we just commit these choices that we made. We like to do it really fast. We like to do it right away. Just commit them. And what happens is our computer is getting relieved. Every time you commit stuff, it's like, oh, cool. I'm just playing tracks. I'm not deciding this thing has to go here and it has to be delay compensated for this and that and all. It's just like a bunch of audio files playing together at the same time. And it's honestly, again, it's another, in my opinion, another reason to, find a way to have a simpler system involving outboard things that you like, because it works, and it's easier as it goes along. When people are working in the box, I mean, who here has gotten to a point where they've got a mix to a point where they're like, now it's perfect, and they hit play and it crashes their computer. That's everybody. That's everybody today. That's everybody today, and that's like the software manufacturer is maintaining a little bit of an edge over everybody, because they're like, well, if that's happening to you, you just need to buy another one of these. And what happens is you'll buy another one of these, and then you'll get to the same fucking point once you max that thing out, right? So I like systems that your process simplifies as it goes along. Doesn't get more complex and more taxing as it goes along. It's a pretty fundamental difference.
You might want to move the camera back.
Oh, I bunked it.
If you're on this is bouncing, not really technical. Like Desert Island, you have 3 pieces of outboard gear from your studio to take with you.
What would they be?
Yeah.
I think it would be.
I'll take care of it.
I think it would be the console.
No, effects or
hardware. It would probably be 1176, like this.
The original.
Or the warm. We have a warm. We don't have an original. Maybe we have a pair of distressors, so probably those.
Yeah.
Again, those are. The other interesting thing about hardware. Oh shit! Hey Matt.
This is right on cue.
Hardware overload.
Couldn't strip that.
Yeah. I'll just run it again.
Pro Tools is so finicky with the buffers and stuff. Like, if you're trying to do too much, it's just like, I mean, I can't tell you how many times.
Yeah, that's the other thing about an HDX system. You just don't run into that.
Yeah.
Not ever. So when we were deciding about getting a Pro Tools native system versus an HDX system, I'm really grateful. My friend George Hajiwano, who I told you about, who he's a gear dealer guy, he could get equipment for anybody in this room, but he's really helpful. And the one thing was, all my younger engineers, not Matt, but like John Lowe, our old engineer, was really convinced. You don't need an HDX system. You just get a native system. Now you can get a native system, and the native system is way less expensive because now computers have all that processing power. Well, what George Hajiwano corrected us on was, so now you're going to be obligated to always have the newest computer. Right. That's way more expensive than the difference in so what was interesting was, we bought an HDX system. The HDX system, let's say, to have all of the ins and outs that we need for our professional studio, that HDX system was going to cost $9,600. the native system is going to cost $8,400. So the difference was like $1,200, but that $1,200 difference obligated us to buy a $3,000 computer versus a $200. And I'm not kidding. That's not an exaggeration. $200.
So with the HDX system, as I understand it, you've got the PCIe card, and then you've got specific Avid converters.
Or any converter.
Okay, so they can talk to any converter. But then the native system, were you going to buy third-party converters?
You could do either or.
But I mean, the quote that you had, the 8,400.
Yeah, no, it was the exact same converters.
Okay.
It was the exact same converters.
You were just adding
$1,200. The question of whether you buy an HDX system, which is PCIe cards,
right.
or a native system, which requires the trash can computer.
Yep.
You know.
Got it.
So I think that guy was. I think it's really, if I can be sort of old school, the idea of knowing an expert, particularly like a gear seller, a person who sells stuff, and maybe, I don't think Sweetwater's bad or evil or anything like that. They're very good. They're very good in a lot of ways. But, sometimes there's those people who, they can be your consultants at a slightly higher level where they're capable of really thinking of what you need.
Yeah.
And that was a perfect example. All the younger engineers that were working with us at the time were like, "Oh, dude, we don't need that old, high-end HDX thing. Now you can just get a native system."
Yeah.
Well, George was able to, and all the Sweetwater people would have told us the same thing. George was like, "Yeah, but now you need to buy a $3,000 computer versus a $200 computer."
Every few years.
So
too.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And he was so right.
That's cool.
He was so right. It was one of the smartest things.
I feel like I need to find somebody like that, because I don't know in Columbus anyone that knows more than I do about that stuff, which is not a good thing. That's not like me. That's like crap. I don't know who to. Other than like, oh, I see you on a forum. Like, can I DM you some whatever? And I feel like you're totally right. Like having a guy that's just dialed. Like this is what you should think about.
And honestly, I mean, there's no reason you couldn't. I never see George Hajiwano in person. He just he lives about 60 miles from me, but he could live 3,000 miles from me. He's just the guy that I talk to.
But the idea is so cool that you've just got like a relationship now.
Exactly.
Right? Where
Yeah. Those I honestly, again, if we are thinking about like the world we live in now, it's pushing us all into this like, yes, we're empowered because we're consumers. It's pushed us into that empowered consumer role. But because things are so consumerized, you're also on your own in ways that you weren't before.
Yeah.
And so one way to kind of give yourself a leg up over all these other people is actually going back and forming those relationships with those people that actually are going to help you make smarter decisions.
That's a great point.
So George Hajiwano used to make like $1 million a year, and he was like the guy providing these consulting services to like Pharrell and Walter Becker of Steely Dan, and who else did I say he did last night? He was doing stuff for big wigs, creating their home studios, right? Having $100,000 to spend on day one, and knowing they're going to spend way more than that. That used to be George's job, and as the world has changed, even those people don't think to go to somebody like him. But they're the worse for it, because now they're just in the general consumer pool, and what the general consumer pool is always going to conclude is everybody needs UAD.
Yeah.
Everybody needs the new Sound Toys plug-in bundle. Everybody needs, and lo and behold, what do we all end up doing? Having all the same stuff, meaning all the same process, workflows and work processes, and all making the same relative decisions at 100 steps along the way, and we all make shit that all sounds just like each other. Whereas the people that are like, well, while everyone's doing that, I'm going to go do this.
Yeah.
If they can pull it all together, it's a little more complicated because you're a little more alone in the world.
Yeah.
You don't have, the forums full of people talking about like what they have done with the new Sound Toys plugin or the new UAD thing. It froze and then I had to do it again. So
But
I think it just finished.
Okay.
That's cool. Yeah.
I think that's a worthwhile way to think and to organize yourself.
Yeah.
Especially, and again, if you're performing services for other people, even more important.
Yeah.
Because people are always going to conclude that, well, they can just do what everybody else is doing.
Right.
But if you come up with a place and a system that works and a set of processes that are enjoyable for them to collaborate with you within, then that's a whole reason to go to his place.
Right.
Versus to sort of
Yeah.
work in collaboration with 10 people who are kind of all keyed into the same things.
Yeah, I've never heard anyone say like, well, he's got the full bundle, so we're gonna go there. Like
Exactly.
you know what I mean, or something.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy. I've talked to people where it seems like it's easy for them to fall into that